Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the third edition of the IRMI Webinar series. It's my pleasure to welcome today's panelists for what I hope will be a really interesting and useful session for all of us. So just a couple of housekeeping points before we get started. This webinar is being recorded, so if any of your colleagues have missed out on today's episode, they can always follow the content which will be uploaded on the India Alliance YouTube channel. You can leave questions anytime during the webinar in the questions box. And just in case the webinar ends abruptly due to any technical glitch, please just join back using the registration link that you've used to join now. And an e-certificate will be provided at the end only to those who attend the entire webinar. And so on that note, just a brief reminder about IRMI, the India Research Management Initiative. This is a new initiative of the India Alliance, which has been launched to build capacity in research management in India. And I'd just like to remind our viewers of the 4 strategic priorities for IRMI through this 5-year period. The strategic priorities include supporting research centers in India in strengthening their research management services, supporting the training, career development, and networking for research managers and administrators, building national and international partnerships for knowledge and resource exchange, and creating a community of practice for research management in India. You can read more about IRMI at the India Alliance website. And as part of IRMI, we've started this webinar series. And with each edition of the webinar series, we hope to look at a particular aspect of research management. And so for the purposes of today's discussion, I'd like to just quickly go through what is known as the funding cycle. I'm sure many of you in the audience are already aware of the funding cycle, so please bear with me. But one can imagine the funding cycle is being split into 2 sort of segments. One is what is known as the pre-award segment, which includes steps such as finding the right kind of funding opportunity, writing the proposal, putting a budget together, assembling the grant application package, submitting the proposal, negotiating, and finally accepting the award. And this is typically followed by what's known as the post-award segment of the funding cycle, which actually involves steps such as initiating the research, hiring personnel, purchasing equipment, getting this expenditure going, and taking the research program forward till it reaches the final stages for reporting of all the research outcomes. So today's webinar is actually going to focus on the pre-award half of this funding cycle. And we have here with us 4 research managers who are extremely experienced in exactly providing pre-award support to the faculty that they work with. And so in terms of the format for today's session, I'm going to first request our panelists to briefly introduce themselves, share their career paths, and tell us a little bit about their roles, especially where they're supporting pre-award services at their institutions. And then we'll move into the second segment of today's webinar, where we will look at specific aspects of the pre-award part of the funding cycle. So on that note, I'd like to invite our first panelist for this afternoon, Vidhya Krishnamoorthy, to tell us a bit about herself. Over to you, Vidhya.
Thank you, Dr. Savita, for the introduction. Good afternoon to the panelists and to the participants. I thank the organizers and my institute for this opportunity to participate in this discussion. My name is Vidhya Krishnamoorthy. At present, I'm the Technical Manager for Grants Coordination at Translational Health Science and Technology Institute. I started as an academic researcher. I worked in India at Madurai Kamaraj University and in the United States of America at the University of Texas and at the Harvard University. During the span of 12 years, I gained the perspective of a researcher and also an appreciation for science administration that works in cooperation with researchers. Later, I accepted a position of science administration at an institution level. And over the past 7 years, I have worked in grants coordination with an emphasis on ethics-related compliance. While I continue to train, workshops and platforms like the India Research Management Initiative helped me to develop this role as a career. A brief about my institution. Yukti, could you please go back to the slide? Yes, yeah. I work at the Translational Health Science and Technology Institute, This is an autonomous institute of the Department of Biotechnology, Ministry of Science and Technology, Government of India. THSTI is one of the cluster institutes of the National Capital Region Biotech Science Cluster. It works to find solutions to complex health problems. The current focus is on 4 thematic areas: maternal and child health, multidisciplinary clinical and translational research, non-communicable diseases, and infection and immunity. With this focus, the collaborations are multidisciplinary. It automatically involves the scientists, clinicians, engineers, and the industry. There are 4 research platforms: the Bioassay Laboratory, Biorepository, Data Management Center, and a small animal facility. These are on the pathway to become national facilities. We are registered with IRMI, and with translation as mandate, there is participation of humans in research. Next slide, please. This is about the pre-award support. Yes. So this discussion is about pre-award. So I would like to highlight the role of my position at the pre-award stage. Generally, pre-award is, like Dr. Savita indicated, spans from looking for the funding opportunity to the issue of a sanction letter. So there's a set of operations. At our institute, it's a course support. Go on. It's available to all the scientists of the institutes. It starts with looking for mandate-specific call for proposals from national and international funders and following up for the funding requirements. Please go on. I also maintain the institutional registrations and renewals required for the funding, and I work with the investigators for the submission of the application. This is agency and investigator specific. We all can appreciate that the requirement of an early career researcher could be entirely different from that of an established researcher. And I work on research grants, international research grants, as well as in workshop grant. I work with the international collaboration. Here, the application process, apart from the research plan, could include components which are funding agency specific and which require due diligence in submission. This could be a budget component, this could be a regulatory component, this could be about mode of participation of an institute, whether it is going to be a direct beneficiary or it's an international partner. I complete those requirements. I also work on consortium grants. I support in multi-institutional coordination for a smooth submission. Mainly, when any research involves humans or animals, this approval from an institutional ethics committee and institutional animal ethics committee is important. I coordinate the review process. Next slide, please, Yukti. So this is the sample representations of the funding agency that have worked at the pre-award stage. This is not an exhaustive list. At the national level, I have worked with the Department of Biotechnology, BIRAC Industrial Research Assistant Council, the Indian Council of Medical Research, the Department of Science and Technology, Science and Engineering Research Board, and of course with India Alliance. At the international level, I have worked with Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, National Institute of Health, the Horizon 2020 program of the European Commission, and the Global Challenges Research Fund of the UK Research and Innovation. The next slide, please. I would like to touch upon the role of an ethics secretariat at the pre-award stage. So the registration of ethics committees is statutory in India. For any committee that reviews human participation research and that involves biomedical and health research, the Department of Health Research is the registering body. And for any committee that is going to review clinical trials, the Central Drug Standard Control Organization is the registering body. You can go on. As such, the operations of the ethics committee, yes, please, you can go on. Yeah, you can bring to that, yes. The ethics secretariat has to ensure the document completeness for review. It has to assess the need for an expedited review or a full review. It has to ensure that the standard operating procedures are followed, and has to ensure that the training of the secretariat and members are complete even for the review process. A similar support can be given to the member secretary of an institutional animal ethics committee for a smooth operation. Thus, the secretariat can play a significant role at the pre-award stage. Thank you. Now over to the next panelist.
Thank you, Vidhya. So now I'd like to invite Sarah and Jane to tell us about themselves and their roles. Over to you, Sarah.
Thank you. So my name is Sarah Tetney. I work at the University of Kent in the UK, just outside of London in England. My career path has been a slightly wavy one, I would say, into research management. I guess you could say this is about my second career. I had an undergrad degree back in the 90s. I didn't really know what I wanted to do, fell into a career working within the National Health Service at the time, and spent about 16 years in a variety of increasingly senior sort of managerial roles within the health service. I had a bit of a midlife crisis, wasn't happy with that anymore. Funnily enough, happened while I went on holiday to India. So I had the typical kind of, I went to India, I reflected on my life, and I decided that I wanted to do something different. So I came back into full-time education, which resulted in me doing a master's, and then that then led to a PhD. And I loved being back in the sort of academic environment. When I finished my PhD, I was debating whether I wanted to go into academia or just stay within the university sector more generally. A job came up, which was about managing a research consortium between the University of Kent and 2 other universities in our region. And I thought, well, that was exciting. It was about working with academics, but it was also about change management. It was about coordination and facilitation. So it kind of brought my previous career skills together with my current. So I ended up applying for that job and getting it as the Eastern Arc officer. Spent a couple of years doing that. And then the role that I'm currently in became available, which is a full-time position supporting social scientists to develop research applications. So I've been doing that now for about 2 years. Jane?
Thanks.
Next slide.
Okay, next slide. Hi. So I'm Jane Benstead, and I work at the University of Kent with Sarah. We're in the same department, Research Services, which is a central department at the university. And I have a fairly sort of what I would call a kind of quite a typical career path for a research support person in the UK. Quite a lot of my colleagues have done this. So I started down a traditional kind of academic route. I did a degree and PhD in cell biology, and then I did 2 postdoc positions, which were both funded by external grants, one from a big cancer charity in the UK, one from the European Commission. And although I loved research, I knew I was going to start a family, and I wanted a bit more flexibility than my work was giving me. The postdocs I did were full-time, sometimes 7 days a week. So I had my first daughter. I had a complete rethink while I was on maternity leave, and then saw a job advertised in research services at the University of Kent. Because I'd done some grant applications, I kind of knew that research support existed, but I wasn't exactly sure what they did. But I thought because it was only temporary, I'd give it a go. So I did 6 months in post there, really enjoyed working in a professional service department. I think it really played to my strengths much more than academic life did. Then I had my second daughter, and during that time, I basically asked the person I'd worked for previously at Kent if they had a job going, would they contact me? And she did. When my daughter was my second daughter was about a year old, she contacted me and asked if I would want to apply for a permanent job in research services. And I did, and that was 11 years ago. So I started as a grants and contracts officer. That has a pre and post award function we're talking about later. Then I became deputy manager of the team. And then about a month ago, I became grants and contracts manager. So next slide, please.
So Jane and I both get involved in the pre-award phase. I am exclusively pre-award. So my job really is all about trying to get academics to apply for funding and be successful in applying for funding. So I spend a lot of time having one-to-one or group conversations with academics, understanding their research interests, understanding where they've already potentially got collaborations in place that we could perhaps draw upon. So I'll meet with them, understand what they do. I will advise on particular funding opportunities. I can do that either through one-to-one conversations, or I do a routine kind of mailing out to all the academics, which just lists upcoming funding opportunities with deadlines. I will provide help with drafting applications. We also maintain a sort of successful proposals bank where we've got examples of previously successful applications, so I can send those around for people to see. I organise internal peer review. I think I'm talking about this a little bit later in the next slide. But more generally, a lot of my role is just about trying to create this kind of positive research culture, trying to encourage people to apply for funding.
Okay, so I'm slightly downstream of Sarah, so I have a sort of joint role that I'm pre and post award. So I do what I would call the operational or practical bits of the proposal. So I help the academics calculate the staff and overhead costs that they have, and I advise on non-staff costs. I also help partners if they're overseas partners and new to our funders, or if they're businesses, then we can help them as well. We give general guidance on scheme rules and eligibility. We check that all the participants are eligible to apply, that all the costs they want are eligible, and that they're ticking all the boxes on the application form. My team administer all the institutional registrations for our funder systems. All our funders use online systems pretty much now. And we also help people fill in parts of those systems because they're not always very easy to follow. We carry out due diligence on our partners and funders if they're new to us. That's just checking that they are, that reputationally they're going to be good to work with and that they would be able to manage a research project in an appropriate way. We handle the paperwork for internal approvals, and we press submit on the funder systems on behalf of the University of Kent. And then my post-award function is basically reading the terms and conditions and the contracts and negotiating those for the academics, and then answering any queries that academics might have about their projects as the project runs. So I'm kind of involved from cradle to grave. And yeah, I guess both of us within research services, it's a lot of general support and encouragement for people to apply for external funding, because sometimes that isn't really embedded in the culture in all of the schools.
Next slide, please. So yeah, just a little bit more about this. So in terms of what I do, I've talked about the consultations. I send out a routine mailing list of sort of upcoming funding opportunities. I don't include every funding opportunity within that. I have a minimum threshold of £10,000. We want to try and encourage our academics to go for big funding opportunities as opposed to lots of small pots. I mentioned the Successful Proposals Bank. This has been really, really useful. So we have examples of successful applications, a whole range of different funding schemes that we keep on file. So if an academic is wanting to apply to a particular scheme, we can give them 2 or 3 examples of a successful one so they can see what's needed to be successful. We also provide quite a bit of training. We run what we call our Grants Factory programme, our Early Career Researcher Network, which is where we put on a whole range of talks, workshops, usually led by fellow academics on a whole variety of topics. So it might be funder specific, for example, how to apply to the Wellcome Trust, or it might be more generic, you know, how to write a good application, how to overcome the imposter syndrome, things like that. So we put on a range of events throughout the year. As I say, we provide a variety of intelligence on a whole range of different funders and schemes. We think institutionally we probably engage with about 500 plus funders. Jane, do you want to pick up on these last points?
Yeah, so yeah, as I've just covered, so we do all the staff and overhead costings because our government give us a lot of regulation around how we work out the costs of research. We check eligibility of everything on the proposal, do all the approvals, help with online systems, and do a small amount of due diligence and ethics at pre-award. Most of that we save for post-award because it's quite a lot of effort if something isn't successful. And then in terms of the whole university, there is a little bit of pre-award support at university level, but it's patchy. So some schools have a little bit of research support within them, and we also have a bit of support in our library and in our IT department to support specific aspects of applications. But I think we probably do the bulk of it at the moment. Next slide, please. So these were just the funding agencies that that we work with, some of the most common ones. So I said we have over 500 funders and schemes across research and innovation, and they are UK and overseas funders. And the types of grant they fund can be split into large multi-partner collaborative grants. Then we have sort of individual fellowships at all career levels, postdoc to advanced career. And we cover small travel, conference and equipment grants as well. So we have 4 broad categories of funder: the UK Research Councils, and that covers the Newton Fund and the Global Challenges Research Fund, which you may have worked with, the European Commission, UK government departments like international development, health, education, the learned societies. Again, they administer a lot of the Newton funding, so that's the Royal Society and the British Academy. And then we have charities and foundations, from tiny charities up to huge ones. So in the UK, the Wellcome and Wellcome Trust are our big ones, but we also work with people like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Okay, next speaker.
Thank you very much, Sarah and Jane, and I now invite Malini to tell us about herself and her role. Over to you, Malini.
Good evening, everyone. Firstly, I would like to thank Savita and the entire IRMI team for initiating these webinar series on research management, and I'm really glad to be part of it. And today I'll be talking about the pre-award support services that we provide at the RDO and how it helps researchers while applying for funding. So I'm Malini. I work as grants advisor at the Research Development Office, Bangalore Life Science Cluster. Bangalore Life Science Cluster is a unique hub of excellence in biological research in India, comprising of 3 institutions: National Center for Biological Sciences, Institute for Stem Cell Science and Regenerative Medicine, and CCAM, which is Center for Cellular and Molecular Platforms. Now, before I talk about the pre-award processes in detail, let me just brief you about my journey so far. So like many in the field, I did not set out to be a research administrator. In fact, I didn't even know about the field when I started venturing out into it. So I started out with a career in academia. I completed my PhD from Sri Chitrathirunal Institute for Medical Science and Technology, Trivandrum. And post-PhD, I joined INSTEM in 2012 to pursue my postdoctoral training. And the post 3 to 3.5 years, I went and joined JNCSR for a brief stint as a postdoctoral fellow. Here at JNC, along with regular lab work, I was actively participating in raising funds for the lab. So basically by curating grant information from different funding agencies, writing a couple of grant proposals, and also coordinating submissions of these grants. So this developed a flair, and at this point, I developed a flair for this role as a facilitator. And it was at this juncture that a chance encounter with my colleague, Dr. Vinita Raghavan, followed by discussions that I had with Dr. Savita Iyer, introduced me to this field of research management. So when an opening came up for my current role at NCBS, I just grabbed the opportunity and joined the RDO as grants advisor in May 2016. So since then, I've been working as grants advisor at RDO. It's been 4 years now. So for me, it was almost a full circle because when I joined Bliss in this new role as a grants administrator, I just realized that I had actually come back to my same space because my old lab had got converted into the new RDO office. So that's my journey. And next slide, please. Yeah, so at the RDO, I'm responsible for providing the pre-award support to researchers on campus. Our pre-award support services, it covers a range of activities from identifying funding to final submission. I'll provide you just an overview of the services that we provide, starting off from grants advice. This I'll be covering in a little more detail in the next slide. We also facilitate grant submissions. We steer a lot of applications of different kinds to different national as well as international agencies. We provide comprehensive support, including compliance review, budget support, due diligence on the application, proposal development, compiling other supporting documentations, for example, the institutional support letters, endorsement letters, etc., and also coordination of submissions based as per the funding agency as well as the institution. Now, in addition to our support with facilitating grant submissions, we also manage activities related to funding and collaborations. We are involved at all stages, including drafting, negotiating, and executing these agreements. Now, we also facilitate collaborations. This is another service that we provide. That is, we host international delegates from different universities and institutes across the globe who wish to collaborate with researchers on our campus. So this helps researchers on campus to have direct interaction with peers across the globe and build their collaborations. So we then help them, once they have figured out the right collaborations, we help them in finding the right funding source that will help different engagements, for example, for international exchange or collaborative grants, and we also help them finding schemes for organizing joint workshops, meetings, etc. So these interactions, it helps them boost these collaborations. Now, in addition to these, we also organize various funding and grant writing workshops in-house. This helps in disseminating the information about the funding schemes to the researchers, and also the grant writing workshops, it mostly stress the early career researcher, mostly postdocs who are in their process of writing their first independent grants. Now, in addition to that, we also do a lot of outreach to funding agencies. That is, we host delegates from different funding agencies. We've hosted delegates from SECRETARIAT, DFT, NSF, EMBO, and such international organizations. And this gives the researchers on campus an opportunity to interact directly with the staff and on a one-on-one basis, so that they get to know more about the funding opportunities that are available, and also get to clarify any queries that they may have, which may not be available on the agency website. In addition, we also visit funding agencies in person and also participate in the meetings that are organized by these funding agencies to keep ourselves updated about the different funding calls that are available, and also about the agency's policy changes or any new updates as required. Next slide, please. Yeah, coming to the grants advice. So curating and disseminating information is one of the major pre-award services that we offer. We do that through different modes. We have audio funding database, we have funding newsletters, we do targeted grants advice, strategic discussion on funding needs, and we are also on Twitter, where we keep updating about the new schemes. Now, coming to the audio database, this is just a small screenshot of what's there on the NCDA's website. You are free to feel free to go and use the database. So we have developed this database, which is freely accessible and widely used database by not just researchers at BLIS, but also a lot of external users. And it provides a detailed list of funding schemes for both independent as well as early career researchers. It's over close to 280 schemes and from about 40 agencies. And it's structured in a very user-friendly manner and is updated on a regular basis. So that's about the funding database. This is the link to it. You can always feel free and check this out. Then we also have our internal funding newsletters. We term them Funding Horizon newsletters. These are sent out to the researchers on a regular basis. And this has information about forthcoming deadlines, any funding successes that has happened on campus, the policy news, or any other announcements related to funding. So this is the regular funding newsletters that we send out. Now, in addition to that, we also have targeted grants advice to both researchers in their early career as well as the independent researchers, depending on what their expertise and experiences and what their requirements are. Yeah, like I just briefed before, so we facilitate grant submissions to a large variety of cohort of funding agencies, and this is just a representative example of the different agencies, types of agencies that we work with. We work with national agencies like DBT, DST, SIR, BIRAD, etc., as well as international agencies like NIH, THSTI, EMBO, etc. And we also work with international foundations and charitable organizations, and also corporate sources from where we also acquire funding. So these are the different types of grants that I assist with, starting off from investigator grants, fellowships, as well as research grants, postdoctoral fellowships, infrastructure grants, and going up to philanthropic grants. So this is a brief about what we offer as pre-award services at BLIS. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Malini. So I hope our audience today has a good feel for the range of pre-award services that our panelists have been involved in. And so in the next segment of today's webinar, I'd just like to draw upon the expertise of our panelists to actually look at some of the steps in pre-award services. So the first sort of crucial step is actually for a PI to identify the correct funding opportunity. There are plenty of different funding schemes out there, different funding agencies, each with its own nuances, and sometimes it can be quite overwhelming to identify the correct funding opportunity. And here's where a research office can really help. So I'm going to start by asking you, Malini, to just elaborate a little bit on that. You've already mentioned the funding database and the newsletters. So could you just share some thoughts on helping researchers identify the right funding opportunity?
Right. Thank you, Savita. So like I just presented, we have different modes of disseminating information, but we also do have strategic discussions with the PIs at different stages of their career. Probably I can just give you a few examples of how we deal with researchers at different stages. For example, for postdoctoral colleagues on campus, we have a very well-structured process wherein we request for their CVs and a summary of the research proposal. And we have one-to-one meetings with these postdocs, and we help them identify the right funding opportunity based on what their expertise and experiences are. Then for newly recruited faculty, for example, we also assist them in transitioning from abroad to India. For example, we help them apply for pre-entry fellowships such as Ramanujan or Ramalingam Swami, and even intermediate fellowships, which help them transition into a new independent role as faculty on campus. And for also those new faculty who are already joined the campus, as part of the orientation program at NCDS, we provide them a list of grants or schemes that they can apply to based on what their expertise and experience is. And we also help them plan and strategize on when and how to apply for these different grants based on their expertise and based on the remit and the competitiveness of their grant. So this helps them to get started off with their new lab and new care, because most of the time the new faculty are new, and for many of them they'll be applying for their new independent grant. So that probably is helpful for the new recruited faculty. Then for faculty who are already on campus, we do active outreach about any new schemes or funding calls that come in through email communications, which are targeted either to all the faculty or to certain subgroups based on what their remit is. For example, we always get queries looking from faculty asking for funding schemes that are either specific for a particular collaboration. For example, they want to do UK or into Swiss. So we help them cater to what the requirement is. And sometimes we also get queries from the faculty asking for a particular scheme in a specific niche area. For example, especially in certain areas where the funding opportunities are generally scanty as compared to the other areas, for example, the ecological sciences. So these are few ways in which we try to help out the faculty find the right funding.
Thank you, Malini. Sarah, would you like to add to that? I know you work very closely with your faculty colleagues.
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of what we do is identical to what Malini just said. So again, it's dependent on the career stage of the academic. We would recommend particular kind of schemes. I mean, I focused on our university has been organised around what we call faculty lines. So we've had 3 faculties within the University of Kent. So I've supported the social sciences faculty, which includes colleagues from working in law, right the way through to kind of conservation science. So it's a really sort of broad sort of range of disciplines. So one of the challenging things, but actually one of the things I really love about my job is actually having to understand the broad range of funders that are available to support that really broad expanse of academic interest. So that's really quite fun. A nice fun bit about the job is, I can go from a conversation with a political scientist talking about Marx and Hegel, and then the next day I'm talking to somebody about conserving trees and orangutans in Borneo. So it's a really kind of diverse thing. Anyway, that's just a plug for the research management role that I do. But yeah, so first of all, it's about getting an understanding of those different range of funders that are out there, having the conversations with the different individuals, and identifying the right funder. One of the things that we do try to keep on top of, which I don't think Malini mentioned, is around sort of success rates, because certainly within the UK context, I'm sure it's exactly the same within India. Different schemes are variably more popular or less popular than others, and more or less competitive as well. So for some schemes in the UK, for example, a British Academy postdoctoral fellowship, which is a really prestigious scheme, success rates can be around about 3 or 4%. So when you're meeting with an individual academic if you think they're going to stand a chance with that scheme or not. So sometimes it's a case of just trying to subtly steer someone away from something that you think there's probably no chance of them getting. So that's kind of quite an important one to keep on top of. I mentioned previously that we run a range of workshops as well. So we do put on kind of training workshops and events just to talk about different funders. And we will involve academics who have had experience of those funders as well, so they can pass on their tips for how to be successful with those particular funders. What are they looking for? How do you make sure that the proposal you're writing is right for that funder as opposed to another funder? Because they are all looking for slightly different things. The other thing that we do have access to at the University of Kent is like an online search engine called Research Professional. I don't know if colleagues in India have heard of that, but there is the opportunity there to do a search for funding opportunities. And sometimes I will encourage individual academics to actually go on and create their own personal profile within Research Professional. So they identify the areas they're interested in, they can identify what kinds of funding they want. Is it training for conference attendance? Is it with public engagement, for example, or is it a directed grant for research? So they can set up their own individual search and save it, and every time a new funding opportunity comes alive, they are in theory alerted to that. I don't think it's very well utilised by our academics. In truth, I tend to use it a lot more in order to pull together sort of funding opportunities. But that is another thing that's available to individual academics to help them find the right funding opportunity. I think I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Vidhya, would you like to add something there?
Covered by Malini and Sarah. Yes, most of the relevant points are covered by Malini and Sarah. I'd like to validate what they said. Yes, like finding the right funding opportunity is very important for an early career researcher. Understanding the funding landscape is something a major support a research administrator can give. And like for me, I think the scouting for call for proposals from unknown funding agencies and knowing the research mandate of the institute is something which is going to be much more useful to the community, because they may not, or like they blink and miss it, opportunities exist and for which they might qualify whether they didn't know it or they were like not sure of venturing there. And these are some things which research administrator can support with. Yes.
Thank you, Vidhya. I think on that note, we'll just move on to the next sort of broad area of work within pre-award, which is constructing the budget. Budget is a very important part of any grant application package. So again, Vidhya, I'd just like you to share a few thoughts based on your experience on how research officers can help PIs put their budgets together, being mindful of all the rules, the allowed costs, the disallowed costs, and all of that.
Right. So with respect to budget, again, the division is about what the established researcher knows. An established researcher in India usually knows the budgeting field for a national funding agency, but where I would say that a research administrator becomes much more supportive is about when he is navigating, understanding direct and indirect costs in an international application. Like the indirect cost category is something which is like not well defined by policies. So these are some things which you can assess with. Like the template that you work in is going to be completely different with respect to international funders. That is something which you can completely take over and help the the researchers to navigate through. When it comes to early career researchers, like the categories of a very basic division of budget itself is new to that person. They don't understand overhead and they do not know how much to part for consumables, and importantly, very importantly, like adhering to the guidelines of the salary emoluments or quotations are so important at the pre-award stage. It actually helps in like redundant work once the funding is ready to be like sanctioned. So this stage you can help the funders saying that this is the guidelines that you have to strictly adhere to, otherwise this is what is going to be the outcome of this. So that really helps.
Thank you, Vidhya. Malini, would you like to add something there?
Yeah, I completely agree with Vidhya on constructing budgets in line with the institution and funding agency norms, because this always helps. If this is done at the pre-award stage, it actually helps in facilitating any negotiations with the agency at the time of activation of the grant. So that's a service that our grant office can provide. Now, in addition to that, probably I can just add on saying that we also help them frame detailed scientific justification for the requested items. For example, most of the time we know that this is a very crucial component of the budget. So people, most of the time we have researchers who come in with proper budgets and we help them with figuring out costs for manpower and overhead. But what happens is that at the time when you look at the review, the scientific justification component of the budget, we see that most of the time it's neglected and is not up to the mark. So if we help, we kind of help them frame these scientific justifications for the requested items, because I feel that it brings in a lot of clarity to even the committees when they are assessing the requirements on these grants. So that's something that we work on. And in addition to that, like Vidhya said about the indirect cost, we also work with some agencies or the schemes. The guidelines on costing the overheads, they're generally not very clear. And they are generally requests, and it's mostly said that it is based on the institutional norm. So for such schemes and for such agencies, what we do is that we work with the leadership as well as the senior administrators, and we draft institutional policies for costing overheads on grants so that there is uniformity across, and depending on what the institutional norms are for the indirect cost. Similarly, we also help early career researchers when they are working on some detailed applications like the IA ECF application on animal cost or usage, wherein you need to provide a very detailed calculation or say power calculations on what your requirements are. So these are few aspects that we touch upon, and most importantly, I would say that an office like this comes in help, especially in large multi-institution grants, when there are a lot of stakeholders, and as an office, we can be the central point contacting all the TIs and looking at the requirements and framing a budget that is in line with both with all the institutional as well as the agency norms. And also the Indo-International Collaborative Exchange grants, I can cite it as an example, where these are grants where we need to have uniformity with respect to what you're requesting for on both the ends. And it always helps when we get to work with peers on the other side. For example, say in the Swiss, where we get to work with the Swiss side, the grant office on the other side. So it helps in building the budget on the proposal in a more systematic and in a more well-framed manner. So that helps later on at the time of activation.
Thank you so much, Malini. Jane, I know we spoke some time back about the importance of getting the budget right at the pre-award stages and how that can help actually good, effective management of the grant. Could you share some thoughts on that?
Yeah, so we're quite bound in the UK about budgets. Our government stipulate that the way we calculate overheads and things like that, and most of our funders won't change the amount of money we've asked for on award. Once we've asked for a certain amount of money, we then have to deliver the project within that budget. And value for money and feasibility are often parts of the assessment criteria. So the academic will be judged on those. And we do have you sometimes have issues with academics thinking that cheapness will be of benefit to them and just trying to bring the budget down as low as they can possibly go. But these are grants that are assessed by experts who know what it takes to run a research project. And we try and sort of drum home the message now that it's value for money, not cheapness. It has to look feasible, or they will think that you don't know what you're doing. And they won't, even if it's a great scientific idea, if it looks like you don't know how to deliver the project, you won't get the award. And also just really thinking about the budget at application stage really can help focus the research plan. So we have really high overhead costs in the UK. 1 year of a researcher costs about £110,000, and your funder may have set a budget limit of £200,000. So you can have one PDRA and some consumables essentially, and a bit of your time. You can't have 2 postdocs or 3 or a load of students. So what have you written in your description of work? You need your budget to help to reflect the research plan that you've got to make sure that everything looks possible. For Kent as well, the budget, we're with Brexit and lack of international students at the moment, we're really focused on our overheads and really trying to maximise those. And if you have expert sort of support and institutional policies on overheads, it makes sure that you get lots of money returned on grants that can then feed into infrastructure development, sort of either laboratories kind of being upgraded or even a central research office or project management support. So yeah, we're really strong on managing overhead applications. And then because I work in the post-award field as well as pre-award, I know the problems I encounter post-award when I've come up against an application that's been awarded, but the budget has not been done robustly enough. Because the academics still got to deliver that project. So then we get a lot of issues with, I haven't got enough money to pay my staff because I didn't realise there wasn't just salary costs I had to ask for. I have to ask for all kind of employers on costs, we call them, taxes and pension. I don't have enough for that, so I can't have a year of a postdoc, I can only have 6 months. That's a huge problem. Forgetting to include costs of events that they've said they were going to run, not actually including them in the budget at all, see that quite often. You're still supposed to run it. The funders, you put it in the delivery plan, so you're supposed to run it, and there's no budget at Kent to subsidise those events, so then you're in trouble. And I mean, most recently, somebody submitting an application at the last minute without our permission, it didn't have a consumables budget at all in it, to a science funder who said, what a great idea, but it's got no consumables budget, so it's not feasible, you can't do it, so we're not interested in funding it. So just, it's such a, sort of post-award, a robust budget that's really well thought through, and a good research plan really, really helps. I mean, sometimes I think applicants think that the application stops at the point at which they've submitted it to the funder, and they haven't really thought about how they're going to run the project if they get it. And it really helps when you have an experienced academic who's thought about, how am I going to deliver this for this money? So yeah, that's...
Yeah. Thank you, Jane.
Yep.
So I think we'll move on to the grant application package as a whole. There's the budget, there's the actual project narrative, but there are so many more bits to any grant application package. So, you know, Sarah and Jane, actually both of you, would you like to share some thoughts on how a research office can help support those other parts of the grant application package, ensuring that the answers are just right?
Yeah, so I mentioned previously, one of the things that we do is that we maintain a successful proposals bank. So we have on file copies of, say, previously successful applications to a whole range of different funders. So one of the very first things that I usually do if I'm talking to an academic and they say they're interested in applying to the Leverhulme Trust, for example, for a project grant, is I'll make sure that they can see previous examples of successful applications, so they know exactly what's being asked for in the varying sections in the form, and how previously people have answered those questions in such a way that is appealing to the funder. So if we take the example of the Leverhulme Trust, for example, which is a very large charitable funder of all subject matters actually in the UK, science, social sciences and the arts and humanities. So it's a major funder for us in the UK and at Kent. So if you're applying to the Leverhulme, the one thing they want to know is, why do you want to apply to us as opposed to any other research funder out there? And answering that question in a really convincing way, in a way that isn't just repeating back to them what they've written on their own website, is like a really important part of any application to Leverhulme. It's a really tiny section on the form. It's only a couple of hundred words as well. So it's quite challenging for the PI, the academic, to actually put that in a really sort of, you know, well-rounded response. But you know, that's one of the most important parts of that application process to Leverhulme. So that's the kind of the intelligence that we can bring to the conversations with academics, but like I say, making sure that they can see previously successful examples and see how people have answered that question. That can be really helpful, I think. What else? We also work quite closely with our, Jane mentioned there are other staff in other departments in the university that do support individual academics in putting together grant applications. One of the areas that's become increasingly important over the last few years, certainly in terms of applications to our research councils, has been something called a data management plan. So this is a sort of statutory attachment that goes to a lot of applications. It's a couple of pages long, and it sets out in quite a lot of detail how you're going, what data you're going to collect and how you're going to store it, making sure that that data is stored sort of safely and securely and all of those sorts of things. So again, we would liaise very closely and we would put the academics in touch with staff within our library services team who can provide both examples, again, of good practice in terms of data management, but can also support them in the actual writing of their data management plan. Jane,
I mean, things like letters of support, we obviously, our department would write institutional letters of support, and we will advise heads of school if they need something more tailored from an academic point of view as a support letter. I think Sarah's team and sort of all of us generally do a lot of checking of lay summaries. That's usually a key aspect of any application. It's especially important in the kind of really technical proposals from engineering departments and bioscience departments, that they have written a really good lay summary. And it's really difficult for somebody who's very close to the science to do that. You need a non-expert to read it and understand what they're getting at. Things like impact statements as well. We have somebody in the library who helps with impact is quite big in the UK. So you've got to talk about how you're going to disseminate your work. Think of sort of outside the box, not just publishing papers. What else are you going to do to highlight your research? So we have people in the library and in research services who help with impact and public engagement, and ethics as well. Actually, ethics considerations are usually included in applications where it's relevant, and we oversee that in research services, but we can also signpost them to particular panels in the faculties that can give them some advice at the pre-award level on ethics. I think that's most of it.
One other thing that I didn't mention, I think the other thing that we support centrally is internal peer review. So in addition to obviously myself kind of sitting with an academic and reviewing their application and providing feedback on it, we also maintain what we call our internal peer review college. So these are academics, again, who have had success with different funders, and who agree to review a colleague's application. So for any application to a major funder, so a research council, the Leverhulme Trust, a big charitable funder, or in the case of where that application exceeds a certain financial value. So for the social sciences, we have a cap of £200,000. So anything in excess of that, we strongly encourage, we can't quite mandate it, but we do strongly encourage that academic, the PI, sends their application to me when it's in a reasonably decent draft, and I will then send that out to the members of the peer review college for that particular funder, and they will provide feedback on that application. And what that does is they're always outside of the discipline that individual is writing from within. So it ensures that they're getting as kind of Jane was saying, almost like that kind of lay perspective on the application. And certainly my experience of organising peer review for academics within the faculty has been that when they do it early enough on in the process that they can actually get comments back and incorporate those comments into their application, it makes a massive difference in terms of strengthening the application, and therefore in terms of the possibility of that award being successful. So that's just another thing that we do, and I think is really important for the process.
Thank you so much. On that note, Jane mentioned ethics, and I'm going to request Vidhya to speak a little bit about not just ethics, but regulatory compliance. There are a lot of things that researchers and institutions need to have in place in terms of compliance. And again, the research office can help support some of those aspects. So over to you, Vidhya.
Rightly pointed out, Dr. Savita, irrespective of whether there is a funding application going on or not, there are certain administrative processes, institution level processes that needs to be completed irrespective of there is a pending application or not. There are in India, most of this institutional level approvals are made statutory. Like we had already, we had an institutional biosafety committee. We have the institutional animal ethics committee, and we have the review committee for genetic manipulation. And now the biomedical and health research related ethics review has also become statutory. So when I say statutory, that means it is regulated by legislation and a passed rule. So investigators may not be aware of it, that these are regulatory compliances. That's the first thing you have to tell them, that being a government of India institutions, you have to have these approvals and get reviewed by these committees. This is something which is very important. So updating them about those is very important. Like the recent COVID-19 pandemic, there were so many updates about regulations that were coming from various departments. Alerting them was very important. This involves even importing strains from various places, exchange of strains between one institute to the other places. These were some things the investigators may not like no, unless there is a research person who is like actively looking for it and then updating them. So there is compliance, and then there is adherence to those regulations. As such, like there is this what I am saying is not like it is not exhaustive list. Like what I have indicated is only for health research. There are so many other regulatory issues depending upon what kind of research is happening in an institute, and depending upon that, you have to like alert the investigators about those regulations. And this particular health research with respect to clinical trials, there is another segment of approvals that is required. You have to get it approved from the drug controller's office. So any academic researcher who is embarking on a clinical trial may not know, because first of all, his research has to be decided upon whether it is going to be academic clinical trial or it's going to be regulatory clinical trial. These are aspects a centralized research administrative personnel or office could advise the researchers on.
Thank you so much, Vidhya. So on that note, I'd just like to share a slide that Malini sent us. This is from work at the Bliss campus, but I think it quite nicely summarizes the various ways in which research officers can provide support at the pre-award stages. And on that note, I think we'll take some questions from the audience. So we have a question here on multidisciplinary proposals. So Sarah, I wonder if you can respond to this. How do you go about bringing faculties from multidisciplinary backgrounds to come together and apply for a common large or consortium grant?
Okay. The first thing I would say, I think, first observation I would make is that increasingly this is what grants are all about these days. So they are about multi-institutional, multidisciplinary, large teams of people working together to address really complex kind of challenges. So certainly in the UK context, we're seeing more and more funders asking for these kinds of sort of research proposals. So the importance of being able to get people together from different disciplines, I think, is it's never been kind of more important, I guess. How do you do it? We've done various things at the University of Kent. So we've run various sort of events and workshops, etc. So we've organised what we call sort of sandpit type activities, which is where you bring individuals together for a period of time, ideally for a couple of days if you can afford it, but more realistically we've operated these kinds of sandpits over days, and essentially they're kind of facilitated workshops, and you just take people through a series of exercises to get them thinking about a common problem, but from their own particular discipline, but having conversations in a multidisciplinary way. One of the exercises that we've run, for example, we had a very mixed sort of diverse group of academics in a room, and you just literally put them into smaller groups, and you give them a task and you say, look, if you had to work on a project together, what would it be? If you had to come together, here you are, you're a group of individuals, you're being stuck in a room, I'm forcing you to think of a project that you can work on together, what would it be? And it's amazing the kind of ideas that just come out from those kinds of conversations. And so you'll have a bioscientist, and you'll have a legal scholar, and you'll have someone from politics, and somehow they manage to come up with really interesting ideas that in various cases as well, when we've run these workshops in the past, have led to actual sort of grant proposals as well sort of coming through. So I would say that there are sort of facilitation tricks and tips, if you like, that you can sort of do to try and help people to come to some kind of common understanding. I feel like I'm rambling. Shut me up, Savita, if I'm talking too much. I feel like I'm trying to give you something more concrete. I guess.
I was going to say, sorry.
Yeah, go, Jane, go on.
Sorry, I was just quickly going to say we did have anyway last year. We did have some small pots of money, didn't we, to help academics travel to meet collaborators as well outside of Kent at one point.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if that money's still available, but that is something that that's at a senior level they were trying to support. So you could write a little application and say, I'm going to go and meet this person in France, and this is the great grant application that will come out of it. So
I think it's kind of what I was sort of struggling with is a difficult balance, because there's only so much, my experience of working within the Eastern Art Research Consortium, which is the sort of 3 universities, Kent, Essex and East Anglia. We'd identified some research priorities, and we had groups of sort of academic colleagues meeting on those themes, but we're also keen to try and encourage new collaborations to come out across the university. And so we organise these events like I was describing, and we sort of get people together and we sort of put them through various exercises and get them to come up with ideas. But at the end of the day, there's only so much I think that can be done sort of centrally driven down to individual academics. And much of what does happen and needs to happen is that individual academics are encouraged to create those kind of collaborations on their own. And as Jane was saying, that's where, certainly we in the past we've been able to support initial sort of fact-finding missions, which have been really, really useful, particularly in the context of sort of global challenges as well and things like that. So sort of international travel, certainly I know colleagues have benefited tremendously from that, being able to kind of create new partnerships by having access to travel monies to get them out there and have those sorts of conversations. But yeah, so sort of to recap, so it's a difficult one, trying to impose something centrally versus enabling the academics to kind of create those creations themselves. No easy answer.
Thank you, Sarah. Vidhya, there's a question on ethical approvals here. Is institutional ethical clearance required to work with hospital data?
So depending upon what data it is, yes. In fact, whether there are different classifications of approval. One is the secretariat level. The member secretary can decide whether this could be expedited or exempted, or it should go for a full board review. Usually, when you're working with hospital data, depending upon how it was collected and whether the participants had already given an approval for use of the data for further research, or this is a generic data which is like completely anonymized and you're using for analysis, depending upon that, you have to still apply to the committee and the committee will decide on it. Depending upon how the data was collected, what kind of data it was, and whether this is going to be very sensitive research that is going to be happening. But it could be at a expedited level or it could be exempted, depending upon what you're proposing. You still have to come to the committee to know about it.
Thank you, Vidhya. Malini, is a question on careers for you. Other than grant writing skills, what are the skills from your graduate and postdoc career could one leverage during interviews for research support jobs?
So that's an interesting question, and I think something that everybody would encounter when starting to venture out into this field. I think during your doctoral and postdoc days, even without knowing, you acquire a lot of skills which comes out quite handy in this field. For example, the time management is one of them, people management, and also multitasking. This is another important thing. That these are skills that a lot of life skills apart from these. So these are few skills that you acquire unknowingly while you are actually pursuing your postdoctoral as well as doctoral studies. So I don't know if there's any ground rule of what to prepare when you're attending for interviews for such positions. But I think any little experience with, for example, if it is to do with grants, a grants job, any little experience with grants. And I think for any job in general, when you're applying, it's always good to look at what the job description is and what they are trying to have, what the job description is basically and what they are looking for. So that you can frame and you can, a little bit of your introspection is required to see what skills do you have, or what you already have that might come out handy in whatever job that you're looking for.
So I think it's fair to say that one mustn't use a scientific CV while applying for a job in research management and administration.
Sure,
you need to
that's
tailor your CV accordingly.
Right. Yeah, true.
Thank you, Malini. Jane, here's a question about the transition from a research, the life of a researcher to a life in research administration. So the question is, what kind of resources help in filling the knowledge gap? For example, how to look for funding or how to organize a consortium?
Yeah, it's been a steep learning curve for me, definitely. I think just building on what Malini was saying, like I'd written and submitted my own grant applications when I was a postdoc with my supervisor, so I kind of knew a little bit about what was involved. That really helps. But in terms of training, I mean, we're lucky in the UK. We obviously have IRMI as well established, so we have a big research management sort of association that runs training courses. I've been on some specific training courses about research contracts and various aspects around budgeting and things like that. And there wasn't a lot of that around when I started 11 years ago, but that's definitely grown in the UK. There's lots more training resources that we send people on. And I'm also I mean, a lot of it you have to teach yourself to a certain extent. You have to be somebody who's willing to learn things yourself, especially if you work in an institution where you might be the only person who's doing a particular thing and you don't have a colleague to train you. What I found really helpful during my career is I joined sort of similar to IRMI, I suppose. We've got a group of people who work in southeastern universities in the UK who all have a similar role, and we are like a little mini association, and we share best practice. We have a kind of LinkedIn group and we ask each other questions, and we meet twice a year, sort of face to face. And that's been really helpful because in my role, I certainly, because Kent is relatively small in the UK, we have to be what we would call jack of all trades, master of none. You have to know a lot, about a lot of things, and it is really hard. There is no specific training courses for a lot of this stuff. But if you are bright and you're used and I think the academic training does help. It gives you a critical eye. It gives you an eye for detail, and also maybe the confidence to challenge academics in what they're doing. I found that academic training really, really helpful, and I look at my colleagues who don't have it, and I think they maybe have a harder time than I do, and I can't necessarily say why, but maybe it's a sort of an interaction with academics, and it's that kind of I probably have more empathy because I've been in their shoes. I know they're in a difficult position. I know what the challenges are for them, maybe a bit more than somebody else. But yeah, if you can get onto training courses, I don't know if things like IRMI would run training courses that you could attend from India, for example. But certainly being involved in something like IRMI early on and helping each other, just forming supportive networks. I think that's kind of, you have to pick a lot of it up on the job, I would say.
Thank you, Jane. That's exactly what we're hoping to do with IRMI. So, here's to growing that community and, having a nice collegiate sort of working group. Vidhya, one final question we will take. This is somebody asking for advice, someone who doesn't have an RDO at their institution. They need help with drafting their proposals. Would you have any advice for how they can do that, how they can improve the standard of the technical parts of their proposal?
What I would say is like you could attend a grant writing workshop to start with. So that could be a much more useful thing to have an idea of how to start with, like how a research office can help. Of course, Jane was mentioning, you have a certain academic background within yourself, and when you read a proposal, you can actually know the way people confuse between objective and aim, and the methodology section, so the title of the proposal, all this catches your eye. So unofficially, you can help. If it is within the purview of what you're supposed to do, you can directly even mention that this is not how you draft the proposal. But considering that we are talking about research support, and when you actively do that, you're actually becoming a scientist. So I don't want to distinguish between advising a person on drafting a proposal on a scientific scale or like how it reads. You can of course mention that it doesn't read well, but that has to be defined within what you're supposed to do in your role. Like for me, I do it very indirectly and with very rare people who are very early career researchers, or maybe students who come with a ethics application, and I see when I read it, it doesn't read well, I tell them. But if I have to give a professional advice, I think there are so many grant writing workshops that a researcher and early career researchers can attend on, and it would be great to get started with one of those.
Thank you very much. And on that note, I'd like to, a huge round of applause for all our panelists for sharing their time and their expertise, telling us about pre-award services. And we hope today's listeners, viewers have found this webinar useful. So do join us for the next edition in the IRMI webinar series. That will be in about a month's time. Again, we will pick a different theme in research management. And now going back to what Jane was saying about having a wonderful community that one can share with and learn with, I'm very happy to announce that IRMI will be, the India Alliance will be organizing the first ever IRMI annual conference early next year. It's going to be the first conference for research managers in India. I can see Malini and Vidhya clapping. And that is precisely the point, because at this point, there are a small number of us research managers in India, but it'd be great to get together. We would have loved to do this in person, but under the current circumstances, it's a bit difficult. So this is being planned as a virtual event. So there will be a webinar same time next week, Friday next week, 4th September. Please join us for that webinar where we'll talk a little bit more about the conference and how you can participate in it and do exactly what Jane said, which is contribute to the community and derive benefits from the community. And the second announcement is that the India Alliance will soon be launching the second round of the funding opportunities through the IRMI stream. So these are the research management fellowships, the research management grants, and travel awards for research managers. So again, join us for the webinar next week, where we'll tell you a little bit more about each of these funding schemes. And on that note, I'd just like to bring today's session to a close, but please do take some time to fill out the feedback form, and please continue attending the IRMI webinars. Thanks a lot, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.